So one of the most exciting things to happen in affordable watches this year was the release of the Seiko 5 Sports GMT, but maybe the most exciting thing about that watch wasn't the watch itself, but the movement inside of it, because along with releasing a new watch, Seiko also launched a new movement and made it available to micro brands, which promised to bring in kind of a new era of affordable GMT watches. And today we're going to be taking a look at a watch that takes full advantage of that in the new RZE Acentus GMT. Hey guys, welcome back to Just the Watch. My name's Dave, I live in Japan, and I love to collect affordable watches. And today we're going to be taking a look at a watch from RZE Watches, which is one of my favorite micro brands for one specific reason, and that's because they make some of the most comfortable titanium watches that I've ever seen. Obviously, titanium watches are lighter than stainless steel watches, which lends to the comfort, but something about the way RZE manages to balance their watches and create their cases, they just wear insanely comfortable on the wrist, really unlike any other metal watch that I've worn. And that's been consistent across every single watch of theirs that I've reviewed. And since I'm a huge fan of GMT watches, I really jumped at the chance to take a look at their latest offering, which is basically a GMT version of one of their previous watches, the Endeavor dive watch. But it's had a number of interesting changes made to it. Again, most prominently with the addition of a GMT complication, allowing you to keep track of the time in at least 2 time zones. But they've also added a brand new 5-link bracelet that really is just insanely comfortable and kind of conforms to your wrist in a magical way. It does have one drawback, which we'll get to as we get into the review. But for those of us who are interested in affordable GMT watches, the thing that's going to be most impressive is the price that they've been able to drop this in at. For $599, they're packing a lot into this watch. And I'm not aware of any other titanium automatic watch with a GMT complication that can match this as far as price goes. Now, this is a review of a prototype watch. There is one key difference between this one and the production one, and that is that the production one will have a date, whereas this prototype is a no-date version. They will not be offering a production version of the no-date one initially. Who knows what they'll do in the future. Also, while this watch is on loan from RZE and I'll be sending it on to the next reviewer, they did promise to send me a production model after the review is done. However, other than that, they did not provide any compensation for this review, nor did they have any input into the content of this review. With all that said, let's jump in and take a look at some of the cool new upgrades that they've added into this watch. The Acentus GMT is essentially a GMT version of RZE's Endeavor dive watch. But the Endeavor was a very unique take on the dive watch. It was very sleek and lightweight and comfortable. And the Acentus retains all that and in some ways even surpasses it with the addition of this new hex-link 5-link bracelet. This watch feels more comfortable on the wrist than any metal watch really has a right to. And this is something that I've really come to appreciate from watches from RZE. They pretty much exclusively make titanium watches, and they are very good at working with this material. Their case designs, their bracelet designs are all excellent, and the result is some of the most comfortable wearable watches that I've ever seen. Compared to stainless steel watches on metal bracelets, these are just night and day difference. Just like the Endeavor, the Acentus is incredibly well balanced. It is very lightweight and super comfortable on the wrist. Pretty much every time I've tested out a watch from RZE, there have been moments where I have had to check and see if I had a watch on my wrist because I literally could not feel it there. And in many ways, this new bracelet only increases that comfort even more, with one exception, which I'll get to when we talk more in detail about the bracelet in a minute. The Acentus features RZE's signature sleek angular case design. It comes in at a width of only 40 millimeters, and that's including that kind of protrusion on the side of the case. The bezel is slightly recessed from that at 39.5 millimeters, but because the sides of the case angle away from the bezel, it's very easy to get a good grip on it. And this is a 120-click unidirectional bezel. The bezel is also a titanium bezel with a black DLC coating, which is a visual change from the Endeavor, which had just the standard titanium finish. Now, the action on titanium bezels is a little bit different. It feels kind of lighter than a stainless steel bezel, which might take you a little bit to get used to, but it is a very solid feeling bezel. It's not loose at all and ratchets in very securely. The one issue that I have on it is that with a 24-hour bezel like this, it really should be bidirectional instead of unidirectional. A unidirectional bezel makes sense for a timing bezel for timing dive times, but it doesn't really on a 24-hour bezel like this. So it was probably just a cost-saving measure to prevent them from having to redesign that aspect of the watch from the Endeavor dive watch. The watch has a uniform kind of bead blasted matte finish, and it is made out of grade 2 titanium, so it has this kind of duller gray color to it. It gives the watch a very tough industrial tool-like look. And while titanium is typically more scratch prone than stainless steel, RZE has put a proprietary ultra hex coating over this, which makes it significantly more scratch resistant than stainless steel. And I've also noticed that in sunlight, the surface of the metal has a slight sheen to it, which I think is part of that ultra hex coating as well. The dial of the watch has a slightly glassy, wet sand kind of texture. This is the azure blue colorway, which is a very interesting shade of blue. I kind of like it. The markings on the dial are minimal with very clean applied indexes. The indexes have rounded corners with a big fat index at 12 o'clock and divided indexes at 3, 6, and 9, which have a cool effect in the dark because those ones have bicolor lume. And the lume is really good on this watch. RZE typically does a pretty good job with their lume. This one comes in with a J-score of 10, which is basically on par with what Seiko does with their entry-level dive watches. So whether you take this watch diving deep underwater or just need something to glow brightly at night to help you read the time, this watch is going to provide that for you. And this is a good time to mention that while this watch that I'm reviewing is a no-date version, there will only be date options available. For the prototypes, RZE had some no-date options created, but they opted to go with only date variants for the production units. And while I know a lot of people prefer no-date watches, I really think with the GMT, a date is essential, so I think that was the right call on their part. The Endeavor was one of my favorite designs from RZE, and the addition of a GMT feature only makes it more appealing to me. Okay, now let's talk about kind of the two killer features of this watch in that new bracelet and the GMT movement. So I really like this new 5-link bracelet. It is just so incredibly fluid and smooth, and there's so many articulation points. It just completely drapes around your wrist in a very comfortable fashion. Part of what makes this metal bracelet so wonderfully fluid is that there is some flex in between those links, not only allowing it to curve around your wrist in a very smooth and unhindered manner, but also to even flex side to side a little bit. That flexibility combined with the lightness and the warmth of titanium makes this an incredibly comfortable bracelet on the wrist. But the drawback to all that flexibility, and I think a consequence of having that little bit of flex in between the links, is that I found that it did catch the hairs on my wrist fairly frequently. Now, it's not quite a deal breaker, but it is unfortunate because the bracelet is normally so comfortable that you forget that it's there until you feel one of your wrist hairs being pulled on. Now, this is the first version of this bracelet that RZE has put out, and this is also a prototype, so it is possible that it will improve over time and with future uses of it. And were it not for the fact that it tugs the hairs on my wrist, I would definitely prefer it over their previous bracelet. I really like the look of it. It's just kind of a cool, unique, industrial style look. And again, that fluidity is kind of off the charts. But as it stands, the previous 3-link version was already incredibly comfortable and didn't have the wrist hair pulling part, so I think I would still prefer that one over this one. But if your wrists are not as hairy as mine, then you probably won't have much of an issue. But I do hope that's something that RZE will be able to improve on going forward. The clasp is very solid with a ton of micro adjustment holes, which I always like to see, so you can get a very good, comfortable fit on this bracelet. And while the bracelet is made completely out of titanium, the clasp itself is made out of stainless steel. And overall, the bracelet and clasp balances the head of the watch very well. There's very little movement of the watch on your wrist. So while I really like where RZE is going with this new bracelet, I think it has a lot of great potential. I think it needs just a little bit more refinement for us guys with slightly hairier wrists. Inside the Acentus is the Seiko NH34 automatic GMT movement. This watch is essentially a GMT version of the incredibly popular Seiko NH35, which is used in a ton of different micro-brand watches, and RZE has used this family of movements in some of their previous releases as well. And that's one of the reasons this watch is able to be offered at such a low price. And while I know $600 isn't cheap, for a titanium watch with these specs, with this design, and with a GMT feature in it, it's actually an incredibly low price. The NH34 automatic movement gives you essentially the same performance as the NH35 with a GMT feature added onto it. This means you get 40 hours of power reserve, that kind of standard 21,600 beats per an hour, 6 ticks per second beat rate, a rated accuracy between -20 and +40 seconds per day, which is what Seiko kind of safely rates most of their budget movements for. Most of the time you're going to get much better accuracy than this. The review unit that was sent over is running at about +60 6 seconds per day, so very well. Additionally, the NH34 features hacking, hand winding, and a quick set date. And of course, the most important feature of this movement, the 4th GMT hand. To set the time on this watch, you're going to pull the crown out to the 2nd position, which will allow you to set the main hour and minute hand. Then bumping it back to the 1st position, where rotating the crown away from you will allow you to jump the GMT hand in 1 hour increments. Now, this watch does feature a rotating 24-hour bezel, but for the most part, you're probably just going to leave that locked in its normal position because there are no 24-hour markings on the dial or on the chapter ring. In fact, there's no chapter ring at all on this watch. So you pretty much have to use the bezel to read the 2nd time zone. Theoretically, you could rotate the bezel to check a different time zone, and with a little bit of mental calculation, you could probably still track the original time zone that you had the GMT hand set to. You just have to remember to double the time on the 12-hour markers when you're reading the GMT hand. RZE said they wanted to maintain a cleaner look on the dial, which is why they didn't clutter it up with additional 24-hour markings. And that's a perfectly reasonable design choice to make. It does look really good with this nice clean dial. So this is looking like it's going to be a really solid release for RZE. I'll be curious to see what it looks like with the date window implemented. I think that will be a great addition to this watch, and for me, make it much more appealing. And I think RZE is really highlighting what you can do with this movement from Seiko, especially when you compare it to the prices of the Seiko 5 Sports GMT. Now, I expect eventually the prices on those Seiko 5s are going to drop, but at the time of this review, they're still trending upwards of $475 to get your hands on one of those. And so for $125 more, you're getting a watch that offers a fully titanium case and bracelet. You're getting a watch that has a sapphire crystal. You're getting a watch with 200 meters of water resistance instead of 100. You're getting that screw down crown, and you're getting the same movement and same performance inside of it. So particularly if you're interested in a titanium GMT watch, I think this is a great value proposition. But let me know what you guys think down below in the comments. Always love to hear from you guys. But that will wrap it up for today. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye.